He gave a poor single mother his unlimited black card for 24 hours. He expected groceries, rent, maybe clothes for her child. But 47 minutes later, his phone lit up with a charge that made his hands shake. She hadn't bought food, she hadn't paid rent, she'd hired a lawyer. And in that moment, a 72-year-old billionaire realized everything he believed about poverty was wrong. His name was Richard Hartwell. 72 years old, silver hair always perfectly combed, suits tailored in London, handshake that felt like signing a contract you hadn't read. He'd started with absolutely nothing. At 23, he slept in his car, ate crackers and tap water, clawed his way up through real estate, then tech, then investments so complex even his accountants needed accountants. He believed in one thing above all else: effort. The world rewarded people who worked and punished people who made excuses. He'd risen from poverty, so poverty wasn't a tragedy to him. It was a choice, a failure of discipline. When he saw homeless people, he thought, I did it, why can't they? When he saw struggling families, he wondered what mistakes they'd made. He donated to charities, but only ones with measurable outcomes. He wanted proof. He wanted receipts. He wanted to know his money was going to people who deserved it. But lately, something had shifted. He couldn't name it exactly. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was how silence felt heavier in his penthouse at night. He'd started noticing people he used to walk past without thinking. The woman at the coffee shop who always smiled even though her shoes were falling apart. The man who collected cans outside his building and said good morning every single day. And then there was her, Elena Martinez, 41 years old, widowed 3 years ago when her husband collapsed at work from an undiagnosed heart condition. It left her with a 6-year-old son named Daniel and medical bills that swallowed her savings in less than 2 months. She worked nights cleaning office buildings, the kind of places she'd never be invited to during the day, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash bins while the city slept. She came home at dawn, woke Daniel, made him breakfast with whatever she could find, walked him to school, then came back to their one-room apartment with peeling paint, a window that wouldn't close, and a landlord who didn't care. She slept 3, maybe 4 hours a day. She skipped meals so Daniel wouldn't notice there wasn't enough food. Every morning she told herself tomorrow would be better, even though she'd been saying that for 3 years.
She'd started making scarves at night, something to do with her hands while she waited for her shift to start. She wove cheap yarn into patterns her grandmother taught her as a child. She sold them on the street sometimes, outside events, outside places where people had money to spend on things they didn't need. Most people walked past her. Some looked through her like she was invisible. A few bought a scarf out of pity, and she could always tell by the way they handed her cash without touching her hand. But she smiled anyway. She thanked them. She folded the scarves carefully, like they mattered, because to her they did. They were proof she was trying, proof she hadn't given up, proof she could still make something beautiful when everything else felt broken. Daniel's worn sneakers sat by the door every night, too small, but all they could afford. That's where Richard saw her, outside the Rosewood Gala, an annual event for the city's wealthiest donors, $500 a plate, champagne fountains, silent auctions for vacation homes. It was raining, light but steady, the kind that soaks through your clothes if you stand in it long enough. She stood under a torn umbrella, scarves draped over her arm, offering them to people in tuxedos and gowns who barely glanced her way. Richard had left the gala early, bored, tired of the same conversations, the same performative generosity. He saw her and stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she smiled at people who ignored her. Maybe it was the care she took folding each scarf. Or maybe it was something he couldn't name. He walked over. She looked up, surprised. "How much?" he asked. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if he was serious. $15, she said quietly. He almost laughed. Not meanly, but because $15 was nothing to him, less than the tip he'd left at dinner. He stared at her for a long moment, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a black card. Not cash, a card. She frowned, confused. He held it out. 24 hours, he said. Use it however you like. Bring it back tomorrow, same time, same place. She didn't move. She thought it was a joke or a test or something worse. People like him didn't do things like this for people like her. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch," he said. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain, leaving her standing there with a credit card that had no limit and no explanation. Her hand shook. She looked down at the card, black and heavy, his name embossed in silver letters. Richard Hartwell. She'd heard that name before. Everyone had. Billionaire, investor, ruthless. She thought about throwing it away. She thought about running after him. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket, went home, and stared at it on her kitchen table until the sun came up.
Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the mattress she shared with Daniel, the one on the floor because she'd sold the bed frame months ago, holding that card like it might disappear if she blinked. She kept thinking it had to be fake, a prank, some kind of psychological experiment. Rich people did things like that sometimes, didn't they? Tested people, filmed them. But she checked her phone, searched his name, and there he was, Richard Hartwell. Forbes lists, interviews, foundations. Real. The card was real. The question was, what was she supposed to do with it? Her first instinct was food. Real food, not dented cans from the dollar store or day-old bread bought half price. She imagined Daniel's face if she brought home fresh fruit, chicken, vegetables, things he only saw in school lunches. But then she thought, what happens after 24 hours? The food runs out. Nothing changes. She thought about rent. She was 2 months behind. The landlord had stopped answering her calls, started leaving notes on the door instead. Pay or leave. She could pay it all off right now, buy herself time, maybe 3 months of not worrying. But 3 months wasn't forever. 3 months was just a delay. She thought about clothes, a winter coat for Daniel. His current one had a broken zipper and stuffing coming out of the sleeves, shoes that fit, a backpack that didn't have his name written in marker because the original tag fell off. But again, what then? He'd outgrow them. She'd be back where she started. And then she thought about something else, something she'd been too afraid to consider because it felt impossible. A way out. Not just survival, not just getting through the next month, actually changing her situation, permanently. She opened her laptop, the one she'd bought used 5 years ago with the screen cracked in the corner, and started searching. Legal aid, family court, custody documentation, background checks. She'd been fighting for 3 years to legally protect Daniel from her late husband's family. They'd started calling, showing up, saying they wanted to help, but she knew what they really wanted: control, a grandchild they could use to ease their guilt for never helping when her husband was alive. She needed legal protection, real protection. She needed a lawyer who didn't work for free and actually knew what they were doing. That cost money, real money, the kind she'd never have until now. She looked at the card. Her hands were still shaking. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for a family law attorney she'd called once before, a woman who'd been kind but firm. "I can't take your case without a retainer. $3,000. Elena had thanked her and hung up. That was 8 months ago. This time, when the receptionist answered, Elena said, "I'd like to schedule a consultation, and I can pay the retainer today." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 47 minutes later, Richard's phone buzzed. He was in his study, reading or pretending to. He'd been distracted all evening, thinking about her, wondering what she'd buy first. He expected groceries, maybe a phone, maybe she'd pay a bill, something immediate, something that proved what he already believed, that poor people couldn't think past tomorrow because poverty didn't let them. The notification appeared. Transaction approved. $3,200. Legal consultation and retainer. He stared at the screen. His chest tightened. Legal. Legal meant conflict, courtrooms, trouble. People don't hire lawyers when things are going well. He set his book down, stood up, paced. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't impulsive. This was planning. This was someone thinking about the future, about protection, about something bigger than survival, and it made him angry. Not at her, at himself. She could have stopped there. Most people would have. She didn't. Over the next 18 hours, the alerts kept coming. Richard watched them appear one after another, each one dismantling another assumption he'd held on to for 72 years. $450, background check and fingerprinting services. $600, medical records retrieval and document certification. $220, school enrollment deposits for a magnet program across town, one with better test scores, better teachers, better chances. For the first time in his life, Richard wasn't watching numbers move. He was watching his certainty collapse. $300, a consultation with a financial planner who specialized in low-income family stability. $1,500, first and last month's rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where Daniel wouldn't have to walk past drug deals to get to school. She wasn't buying comfort. She wasn't buying relief. She was buying leverage, a foundation her son could stand on. Richard, sitting in his study surrounded by awards and degrees and photos of himself shaking hands with presidents, felt something crack open inside him. His assistant called. "Mr. Hartwell, I think you should know there's been unusual activity on the card you reported as a test case." "I'm aware," he said. "Should we flag it?" "No. Let it continue." "Are you sure? She's spending strategically. This could be fraud." "It's not fraud," he said quietly. "It's something else." He thought about calling her, demanding an explanation, asking why she wasn't buying food, wasn't buying clothes, wasn't doing what he expected. But he didn't, because part of him, a part he didn't want to admit existed, was afraid of what she might say, afraid she might ask him a question he couldn't answer. That night, Elena sat at the small table in her apartment, the card in front of her, a notebook filled with numbers and lists and plans. Daniel was asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and rain still tapping against the cracked window. She'd spent hours on the phone, hours filling out forms, hours explaining her situation to people who, for the first time, didn't make her feel like a burden. She'd cried twice. Once when the lawyer said, "We can protect him." Once when the school administrator said, "He's exactly the kind of student we want here." She had 4 hours left, 4 hours before the 24-hour deadline. She looked at the balance. She'd spent carefully, tracked everything, made sure every dollar went towards something that would last, something that would matter after the card went back. But there was money left, more than she'd expected, enough to buy herself something, a new coat, a pair of shoes without holes, a night where she didn't go to bed hungry. She thought about it. She really did. But then she thought about the kind of person she wanted Daniel to grow up believing she was. And she opened her laptop one more time. The final transaction came through at 6:43 in the morning. Richard was already awake. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night watching the alerts, reading between the lines, trying to understand. The notification appeared. $0. Donation receipt attached. He opened it. She donated the remaining balance, every cent, anonymous. He stared at the screen. Then the details loaded. To a nonprofit called Second Chances Fund, an organization that provided emergency legal aid, housing deposits, and educational resources to single parents in crisis. And she'd made the donation in his name. Attached was a note. Just a few lines, typed on a phone, no flourish, no drama. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't know why you did this. Maybe you wanted to see what I'd do. Maybe you thought I'd waste it. I almost did. But then I thought about my son. I thought about the kind of world I want him to grow up in, a world where people help each other, not because they have to, but because they can. I didn't want him to think kindness was rare, or that people like you don't see people like me. So I used your money the way I hoped someone would use it for him if I wasn't here. Thank you. I'll bring the card back today. Elena. Richard read it 3 times. Then he set his phone down, and for the first time in 30 years, he cried. Not because of the money, not because of the donation, but because she'd seen him, really seen him. She'd looked past the test, past the experiment, past the assumptions, and chosen to believe he was better than he'd been. That belief, that quiet, unearned grace, shattered everything. At 7:30 that morning, Richard stood outside the Rosewood Hotel, same place they'd met, rain still falling, but lighter now. She arrived exactly on time. She looked tired, her coat still damp, her shoes still worn, but her face was calm. She walked up to him and held out the card. He didn't take it. He just looked at her. "Why?" he asked. She frowned. "Why what? Why didn't you buy yourself anything?" She looked down, smiled a little, sad but not bitter. "Because buying myself something would have felt good for a day," she said. "What I bought will matter for years." He nodded slowly. "And the donation?" She met his eyes. "Because my son is going to ask me one day what kind of person I was when I had the chance to do something that mattered, and I want to be able to tell him the truth." Richard felt his throat tighten. He took the card from her hand. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "Keep it." She blinked. "What?" "The card. Keep it." "I don't understand."
"You used it better in 24 hours than I've used my money in 24 years, he said. "I want to help. Not because you need it, because I need to remember what you just taught me." She stared at him, shook her head. "I can't. I didn't do this for—" "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership. You're going to finish what you started. You're going to get Daniel into that school. You're going to finalize that custody case, and you're going to let me fund it. Not as a favor, as an investment in the kind of person I should have been a long time ago." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. 3 months later, Daniel started at his new school. Elena won full legal custody. The apartment she'd secured became the first stable home Daniel had known in years. Richard didn't just fund her case, he built a foundation, called it the Second Chances Initiative. It provided legal aid, housing support, and educational resources to single parents who were one emergency away from losing everything. Every year, on the anniversary of that rainy night, Richard and Elena met for coffee, not as donor and recipient, as friends, as people who'd changed each other. He told her once, over coffee on a quiet Tuesday morning, "I thought I was testing you." She smiled. "You were, but I was testing you too." He laughed, nodded. "And what did you learn?" "That people aren't poor because they make bad choices," she said. "They make hard choices because they're poor. And sometimes all they need is someone to see them clearly enough to believe they deserve a chance." He sat back, looked out the window, nodded again. "I spent 72 years thinking I'd figured the world out," he said. "Turns out I was just good at ignoring the parts that made me uncomfortable." She reached across the table, squeezed his hand. "You're not ignoring them anymore." What she bought wasn't just legal help or school fees or rent. What she bought was time. Time for her son, time for herself, time to stop surviving and start living. And what Richard lost that day wasn't money. It was the comfort of his assumptions, the safety of his judgment, the distance he'd kept between himself and people whose struggles he didn't want to understand. What he gained was harder to name, but it felt like waking up. Poverty doesn't destroy intelligence. It destroys margin for error. Most people never get tested. They just get judged.
Were you Elena or were you Richard? If someone handed you unlimited money for 24 hours, what would you buy first? Comfort or change? And if you saw someone struggling today, Would you see them clearly, or would you walk past like everyone else? Because the truth is, we walk past people every single day. People who are trying. People who are one emergency away from losing everything. And we tell ourselves stories to make it easier. They made bad choices. They're not trying hard enough. But Elena was trying. She'd been trying for 3 years. All it took was one person, one moment, one choice to see her clearly, and everything changed. Not because she was special, but because she was human. And sometimes that's all people need to be seen as. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. What moment hit you hardest? Was it when she chose legal help over food? When she donated the rest? Or when Richard cried? Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been Elena, or if you've ever been Richard. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this if it meant something. Because kindness isn't about what you give, it's about what you see. And sometimes seeing someone clearly is the most valuable thing you can offer. Thank you for watching.